Hi guys, welcome to The Art of Server. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to repair the SFF8643 connector on a SAS HBA card. So if you guys have watched my video about how to choose SAS cables, I mentioned that the SFF8643, which are connectors that are kind of a squarish looking connector, hopefully you can kind of see that, that these are all plastic. And so they're rather fragile, and I recommend that you don't use these in an external application because a slight yank could easily break these things. And I wasn't joking about that because as you can see here, this is an example. Now this wasn't necessarily used in an external application, but just somebody yanked too hard on the cable, and let's see, yeah, you can probably see how the plastic is broken there. And so now a cable that's plugged in there will not latch on securely. It could easily come back out. So I'm going to fix this card. This card is working other than this connector being damaged. And this is the way I received it. And so when I give you the advice to be careful with these SFF8643 connectors, I'm speaking from experience here. I get a lot of cards that sometimes arrive like this, and unfortunately I won't sell a card that's damaged like this to you guys. And so I've had some of these cards kind of just sitting on a shelf because otherwise they do work, and sometimes I'll use something like this for my lab to just do experiments with, you know, things where I'm not really concerned about losing the connection if something comes loose, just because I'm just experimenting with stuff and stuff like that. So I'll use this in the lab environment just to kind of at least make some use of it. But today I'm going to show you how you can repair a connector like that that's been damaged. So I've got two cards here that are essentially damaged in the same way. So whoever was pulling these cables was just a little bit too rough, and can you see that there? Yeah. So anyway, yeah, you can see how they're damaged. So anyway, it turns out these connectors, and this is a used one, so I can't reuse this, but these connectors are usually not soldered on. Sometimes they are, but usually they're not. They're what's called press fit connectors. And so basically, I won't be able to show this in the camera here because it's just too small, but there are these tiny little pins. Let's see if you can kind of see that a little bit. There's these tiny little pins, and you're not going to be able to see the detail in the camera here, but what they look like is like the eye of a needle, a threading needle. And so basically it's like a little oval shape with a hole in it. And when they get pressed into a hole, that oval shape gets squished, and that secures that pin inside the hole that it goes into. And so there's, I think, like 36 of them each on each connector. And so these are press fitted, and so that makes them actually fairly easy to replace if you know how. There are some cards I've seen where they're press fitted and then they're soldered, and so those are a lot harder because you have to remove all the solder, and it's really hard to get the solder out because these pins are so small. Traditional methods of removing solder is just it isn't going to work very easily. So if they're soldered, your chances of replacing this might be pretty tough because if you don't remove all the solder and you pull this out, it could tear the copper traces out of the hole. And so yeah, so you might end up just damaging the PCB more than anything else. So anyway, if you're going to do something like this, just take a look and I'll show you. So these connectors, this is essentially the same type of connector. This is a different brand. This is a Molex, this is an Amphenol, but they function the same. If you flip the card to the opposite side, you'll see all the holes. So they're just through holes. And the tiny little pins, if you look really carefully, I know you're not going to see it in the camera here, but if you have a card like this, flip it around and look at the holes, and you'll see the tiny little pins, the tip of the pin sticking through. And sometimes, I've seen, rarely, but I've seen cards where they basically go over these with solder, and maybe just to make the connection more secure. But a lot of times they're not. And when they're not soldered in, And they don't have to be. They work without being soldered in. But when they're not soldered in, they're actually fairly easy to replace if you know how. So anyway, if you're going to do this, take a look at the back of the board and just see if you can see the little tips of the pins coming through those holes and that there's no solder there. If you see solder there, then you know, it might be a little bit harder to do this kind of repair. But okay, anyway, I'm going to repair those. This, like I said, is a used connector, so I can't reuse these. The reason you can't reuse this is because, as I mentioned, those little pins look like the eye of a threading needle, and once they're compressed, they kind of change, the shape deforms, and so when you reinsert them into another connector or another hole, a pinhole, they don't always make a good secure connection afterwards. So they're kind of one-time use only. I suppose if you are really tenacious, you could go in and try to like spread those the eye of the hole a little bit and kind of get it back into its former shape. But that's a lot more work than I think than makes sense, since these connectors are really not that expensive. So anyway, I bought some of these from Mouser Electronics, and the manufacturer part number to this, in case you guys want to know, is I'll just read it to you, G40H12331HR. Okay, so if you need to order these, you can order them from various places. These are made by Amphenol, and there's other brands that make very similar things too. So I just happened to order a couple of things, and I ordered some of these. So anyway, I don't need all of them out right now, but this is a sample. Let me put this one aside because that one's no good, and I don't want to mix them up. So if you look really carefully, and again, I don't know that I'll be able to catch this in the camera, but the little pins here are the eye. The hole in the pin is basically a little bit wider because they haven't been used before, and so these have not been compressed yet. So anyway, we're going to replace the damaged connector with a brand new one. As you can see, this has no damage because they're brand new. All right, so let's go ahead and start with this one. So the first thing you want to do is that these connectors, other than being press fitted, and they're fairly secure once they're press fitted, but they're usually also secured with some screws on the back. And so we're going to first remove those screws. And so for that, I'm just using a Phillips #1 screwdriver. And let's see if I can do this for the camera here. All right, so be sure to save those screws because you're going to reuse them. And they're just they just screw into the plastic, so there's no, like, the threads on the other side are pretty fragile, so just, you know, keep that in mind. Okay, so once the screws are out, as you can see, they just go into the plastic on the other side. Once the screws are out, the only thing that's holding this connector, so long as it's not the ones that are soldered in, are really just the tension of the pins in the holes. And so you just have to pry this out. And you want to do that a little bit carefully. So let me just put the screws aside here. I'm going to start with this little flathead screwdriver. I'm just going to pry at it a little bit from this side. And just go gently. Yeah. So it can be a little bit tricky because, like I said, these connectors are plastic, and so they're just a little bit fragile. But you can see, I think, hopefully you can maybe see that in the camera there, that it's starting to show a little gap. And it doesn't take much effort, just kind of keep going. And I'm just going very gently, slowly, because I don't want to scratch or damage anything. Okay, so now I think you can see that the gap is, hopefully you can see that, it's even wider now. Okay, and I'll pry a little bit on this side as well. Oh, actually, I think it came loose. Okay, so there you have it. That's how you remove the connector. Sometimes you can use like a plastic prying tool as well. I was going to use this, but I didn't need it, I guess. So anyway, yeah, this is the damaged connector that's been removed. And so we're going to put that aside. And I need to basically press this new one in. So the first thing you want to do is just make sure that the holes line up. So it's going to be hard because there's a lot of pins. And okay, actually this one looks like there's a slightly bent pin. So I might have to take this to the workbench and try to like straighten out that pin. So alright, I'm not going to use this one. Let's see if I can find one that has pins that are already straight. Because basically you're going to have to align all these pins into the holes at the same time. And once the tip gets into the hole, it's fine. You just have to press the rest of it in. But you want to make sure that before you start pressing on it, that all the holes line up. And I'm just kind of checking to make sure these pins are straight. I think these pins are all straight. Unfortunately, the other ones got bent a little bit, but I can probably fix it with some tweezers or something like that. But all right, so you just have to kind of, and I kind of go by feel mostly, but you kind of, yeah, okay, so I can kind of feel like all the tips are in, and I'll kind of take a visual here. So yeah, it looks like everything is in. Now the hard part is pressing this in. If you don't have, I highly recommend getting some sort of tool to do this, because it's not easy to do by hand. At least my thumbs are not strong enough to press this in easily. Okay, so what I have, now I might just, let's see. Yeah, so enough of the pin is in that you can see it's kind of holding its place, but it's not press fitted all the way yet. Okay, so the tool that I found that works really well with this are these adjustable Knipex pliers. So you'll notice this has adjustable jaws, but they're perfectly smooth, so they're not going to mar anything or like damage the board or the plastic. And you can see that the jaws move completely in parallel to each other, and so that'll apply even pressure. Now the trick is though, with something like this, is that the top, from the top you can just press on this kind of flat area right here, and that's okay. And oh yeah, it's not all the way in, so it kind of came loose a little bit there. But on the back is the tricky part, because sometimes there are components here and you don't want to press down on that because you could end up damaging components. So now where the pins are, the holes are, I mean, that area is usually clear, but around it you might find some components. So you want to be careful about not damaging those components as you're applying the pressure. So in particular right now on this board, there are 4 tiny little capacitors right here. So I want to make sure that I don't compress the pliers on top of those little capacitors. But otherwise it looks pretty good. This area is fairly clear other than those capacitors. This area is really clear. So I have some clearance to do this. And so let me do the easier side first. So let me first make adjustments to make sure that this is the right adjustment. Okay, so hopefully, let's see if you guys can see this. I'm not applying any pressure yet, I'm just kind of holding it. And so let's see if I can show you. All right, so you can see that I have the pliers over this area, which has no capacitors or any other components on the surface, Over here is where I want to be careful because there are 4 little capacitors there. I don't want to damage those. On the other side, I'm simply applying pressure to the top of the flat portion of the connector. And so I'm just going to apply a little pressure to get that in. And with these pliers, you really don't need to apply a lot because there's a lot of leverage. Okay, so that one went in a little bit. And I'm just going to go very slowly and gently. Okay, and on this other side, I've moved the pliers a little bit, but you can see, hopefully you can see, I'm avoiding the 4 capacitors there, so I'm not going to apply any pressure to the 4 capacitors there. Hopefully you guys can see that. Okay, so on this side, I'm just pressing on the top flat portion of the connector, and I'm just going to apply a little bit of gentle pressure right now. Okay, so I can kind of feel that squeeze in a little bit, and I'll just kind of repeat the same thing over here. All right, so let's see if, all right, yep. So I know you guys can't really see it, but I can feel the pins going in. And so again, this is I'm avoiding those 4 capacitors. And so I'm going to just apply a little bit more pressure on this side. And that's all the way in right now. I'll go back to the other one. And that's all the way in. Okay. So, yep. So, I don't know if you guys can see this, but the plastic connector is now completely flush with the PCB board. And so now that's completely pressed in. And then on the other side, if you look very carefully, you should see the tip of the pins kind of peeking through the little holes there. And I know, you know, unless I get a really good close-up shot of that, you guys are not really going to see that, but I just want to give you the idea. If you're doing this on your own, you can see it with your naked eye, that there are little dots in the middle of each of these holes, and that's the tip of the pin that's sticking through. And so you want to just make sure that that's showing through. All right, so once that new connector is press fitted in, then all we have to do is put the screws back in. So I like to start with the middle. And again, this is, the screws are going into some plastic, so they're just going to self-thread. And you can kind of feel it. It's going to be a little bit tight at first because I think the holes don't have threads to begin with. So let's see, get this up for the camera for you guys to see. So I'm just kind of lightly, you don't have to really crank these down again because they're just going into plastic. They're just there to add a little bit more extra security so that, you know, just to kind of hold the connector in. All right, and yeah, and don't over tighten it because it's plastic on the other end, you'll end up stripping it if you torque it down too much. So it just needs to go in until it's flush. All right. Yep. All right, one last screw. All right, like I said, don't tighten it too tight because you'll just end up stripping the plastic threads on the other end. But that's pretty much it. So that's how you can fix, if you end up damaging the plastic 8643 connectors, that's how you can replace them, and it looks brand new basically. So these connectors are not that expensive. I think they were maybe like I think I paid like $10 or something. I ordered these a while ago, so I don't quite remember exactly, but I think I paid about $10 or so. So it's not too expensive. And like I said, there's not, so long as these were not soldered in, it doesn't really require any kind of special soldering skills or anything like that. All you need is pliers like these. And oh, by the way, in case you want to get these exact same pliers, these are Knepex part number 8605250. So these are really handy. I actually use these mostly in the garage for various DIY projects and stuff like that. But when I was trying to figure out how to press fit this, it turned out that this was a great fit for that. And you really, because this is so long, you really only like very light pressure to press fit that in. You don't have to compress it very hard at all. So that's why I was being very kind of gentle and slow in doing that, because it's just, you can easily over apply the pressure, and this is all plastic. So anyway, if you want to get these pliers, they're a little bit expensive. They're made in Germany, but they are the Knepex 8605250. All right, and so that's all you really need. A flathead screwdriver to pry the connector off, and a Phillips #1 screwdriver to get the little screws off, and you can fix your HBA. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you guys in case you end up with a damaged card. Not all hope is lost, and for about $10 or so plus shipping, you can replace those connectors and basically make it like new again. All right, so I just thought that might be useful to you guys. Hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, please make sure to give this video a like, and if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to see more useful and interesting videos like this from me. And anyway, thank you very much for watching, and have a great day. Bye-bye.